Okay. Hey everyone, this is One Person Army, how to be the first security engineer at a company. I'm Kashish Mittal. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. So before I start, quick disclaimer, all the opinions expressed in this talk are solely my own and do not express the views of either my current or former employers. This is just so I don't get sued. So who am I? I'm currently head of security at this team within Microsoft called Mobile Data Labs, which was formerly a startup by the name of MileIQ before we got acquired. In previous versions, I've worked at Elevate Security, Duo Security, Scilab, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank. And if you guys haven't realized yet, I speak with an Indian accent. I'm not pretending to be Apu from The Simpsons or doing a bit. So if you guys don't understand anything, feel free to raise your hands and I'll be happy to repeat it. So a bit of background about me. So how did I get into security? So I went to this tiny college in a city, Pittsburgh in USA called Carnegie Mellon. So I did my bachelor's and master's there. Master's was specifically focused towards computer security. Did a lot of security research in our cybersecurity lab called Scilab. I've been a member of this CTF group called Played Parliament of Pawning, and that's where I learned a lot of technical skills and through CTFs. So as I know it's late and you guys are all waiting for the gin o'clock event, so let's do some exercise to wake you guys all up. So any of you guys here started a security team or were the first security person / engineer in a company? Quite a few of them, nice. And any of you who don't identify as a security engineer, but were asked to manage the security at either a startup or a company in the meantime? None of you. Maybe one of you. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you guys. So what makes me qualified to talk about this, right? So I've done this 3 times now, basically building security teams from the ground up. My experience has mostly been in working at hyper growth and high risk startups. And the first instance of this was where I started and helped build the application security team at Duo Security. I'll talk a bit about each of these experiences in a bit. Then I was a founding engineer at this startup called Elevate Security. And most recently, I started the information security program at MileIQ Microsoft. So yeah, Duo Security. Some of you guys might be using Duo Security. It was a 2FA and authentication company, highly sensitive data. Recently got acquired by Cisco. So I was the first dedicated application security engineer there. We were a team of 4 by the time I left. So what we basically built or did there is install the SSDLC cycle, which is basically known as the secure software development lifecycle. So things included stuff like threat modeling, design reviews, code analysis, security assessments, bug bounty, so on and so forth. So the next opportunity I got was at Elevate Security. I was one of the founding engineers there. So our aim there was to build security awareness and security behavior change content and platform for enterprise employees, and basically help security teams roll out such trainings, such education platforms amongst their own company, and things involving better security behavior in terms of phishing or malware or passwords, so on and so forth. And yeah, most recently MileIQ. So MileIQ was a mileage tracking and expensing application. So if you're a contractor or if you can claim deductions based on how much you drive for work, we used to track that and give you reports that you can use for your tax purposes or reimbursement. And fortunately, we got acquired by Microsoft. So I was the first security engineer there. Frankly, there was little to no security before I had joined. I'm head of security now, so some of the things I manage there include AppSec, CorpSec, InfraSec, a bit of privacy and compliance. So yeah, so fundamentally, if you look at all these opportunities, what's common there is that we are looking to build security from 0 to 1. Right? Or in the computer science sense, 0 to 1. But if you think about these 2 numbers mathematically, there's an infinity of possibilities within them. So that's where the journey of a security engineer, who's the first security engineer, basically lies. And my objective here is to share some key learnings from these experiences that I've had. So you guys can, use that and leverage that in other such opportunities that you guys get. So yeah, so what is the ideology? So the ideology is borrowed from this military term called one-man army, which according to Wikipedia, is defined in the following way, right? So I want you guys to pay focus on the bolded items there. So a heavily armed and well-trained combatant able to face numerous enemies alone, right? So the idea here is heavily armed is in like you have all the weapons and defenses that you need, well-trained because you need to employ your skills, your tactics, your procedures, and numerous enemies alone, because the idea being when you're a team of one or when you're the first security engineer, there's a lot of threats that you have to manage on your own. So that's where the idea is borrowed from. And yeah, earlier the talk was titled One Man Army, because that's where the military technique is. But the idea is that, this is gender neutral. Like it's equally likely for a woman to be as good a first security engineer. So now it's called One Person Army. So yeah, so how do you go about doing this, right? So first things first, like when you first accept the job, what are the things that you can do? The very first thing that you should do is familiarizing yourself with the organization. So for those of you who are pen testers, it's very similar to the reconnaissance phase there. So, looking at decision making, looking at who are the stakeholders, what kind of pace can you impact changes with. The other thing is identifying yourself with the stack and the tools that the company operates with. So what kind of cloud platform are they using? Is it Azure? Is it AWS? Is it Google? What are the languages that the code is written at, right? Back-end and front-end code. What kind of databases are being used and where all the data is being stored. So identifying and learning about such stuff. And then the other thing is identifying some key associates who understand or value security that will be able to help you along your journey. So the idea is that if you're hired at some similar company, at least one person in the organization understood and valued security. That's why you were hired, or that's why you are in that position right now. So, identifying such people who will be your allies along your journey. The other point is making an impact early, right? So when you get hired, when you join the organization, show them the value of having a security engineer. Show them the delta between what they did not have earlier and what value you provide now that you're there in the organization. One of the things that we've used successfully is catching the low-hanging fruit. So what that means is, some 3 to 5 things that you can change in the first 90 days. They don't need to be radical, long-lasting projects that will require 6 months, because then you won't be able to show the immediate impact. But basic quick fixes that you can do, which actually show a big impact in reducing the threat factor or reducing the risk for the organization. So I'll share some examples. Hopefully you guys will be able to derive more understanding from that. So one of the organizations that I joined, they did not have any 2FA, two-factor authentication. They were using personal emails for corporate resources, and the password hygiene was horrible to say the least. So the idea is that if you combine these things, a simple phishing email to one of the employees' personal emails could lead to compromise of all our customer data, or even, taking over their account, which has a bunch of these resources. So here the fixes were, relatively straightforward. So removing access through all personal emails, because now we have a corporate domain. We have access to emails or work emails from there. So allowing access only through that. Enforcing and mandating 2FA on at least all the sensitive resources, including access to customer data or access to production environments, so on and so forth. And finally, first explaining why, having secure passwords is important, and then facilitating that through a password manager or whatever you guys think is the best alternative there. We use password managers. So that's one such idea. The other case was we were hosting all our code on GitHub. So on GitHub, there's this feature where you can irrevocably delete all your organization data, including all the code. And, you can allow this access or access to this operation to a few select individuals. So in our org, unfortunately, that access was given to all the developers. And again, the issue was that nobody bothered to check with the GitHub settings. Nobody bothered to, see what access control needs to be implemented. So here it was a relatively simple fix, revoking access to everyone except the person who managed the GitHub account and the CTO, because this is not an operation that you guys will need to do often or frequently. So that was the case there. The last example I'd like to share is extracting all our customer data. So we are working in this organization. We dealt with PII. So PII is personally identifiable information. So things like your social security number, things like your exact location, things like your name and credit card. So anything that can be used to personally identify you, which is considered the most sensitive or the highest sensitivity of data that you want to protect. So the concern there was that all our data was being stored in this database behind this dashboard, which anyone had access to. And the access control policy or the access control method of that resource was so broken that anyone could add anyone else. So the idea is that, there are a bunch of personal emails that can use that access. At least those emails were employee owned, but any of them could get phished, get access to the portal, and then also add other emails to that portal. So again, in that case, it would lead to exfiltration of all our customer data, which I don't have to tell you guys, like for a startup, that's probably the worst thing that can happen in terms of security. If all your customer data, including the PII bits, gets exfiltrated and you get that dreaded email. So yeah, so here it was a 2 or 3 layered procedure. So first, verifying that the emails that were actually on there, even though they were personal emails, they were only owned by our employees, and no actual external email was added on, and we don't have to do more incident response. The second part was, once those emails were truncated, implementing some sort of role-based access control. So who are people who need reader access to this or read access to this data source? Who are people that we want to make admins so they can add other people on there, and so on and so forth. So these are like relatively quick fixes. I would say the longest one that took us time was, setting up and evangelizing and, helping people on board to password managers, especially those who are not familiar with it. But still, any of them did not take more than 2 weeks time. So these are some quick fixes that you guys can implement, which will, drastically reduce the risk or the threat that your organization faces. So then there's this technique which I call secure document repeat, right? So when you first join the organization, you'll find a lot of insecure stuff. So what do you do with it, right? So you obviously go about securing it, but that's not where your job ends. You should also document whatever you feel is the secure way of interacting with those resources, and you just keep doing this process over and over and over. So to give you an example, let's assume you guys have a bunch of VMs and subscriptions. I've taken Azure as an example. So there'll be cases where people have opened these VMs with ports that are not supposed to be visible, or, they've given access to interact with these VMs for people who don't need that. So you obviously secure down your current resources, but you also document what is the correct way to spin up a new subscription. What is the correct way of spinning up a new VM? What kind of logging and auditing controls you need to build there. And the idea there is that once you document these processes and evangelize them, you don't have to keep manually reviewing or fixing such resources for future deployments. And that's what we are trying to look at. Similarly, if you look at data storage, right? So you might want to publish a set of guidelines saying these are the data security guidelines that we care about, not just with the database that we are currently interacting, but any other database that you guys spin up in the future. This is for developers. You tell them that, I want you to follow this similar set of guidelines. And the idea here is, these 3 things that we want to focus on: efficiency, availability, and repeatability. So efficiency, because you don't want to keep spending your cycles again and again on the same thing. You'll be resource constrained, especially if you're a team of 1. Availability, so that if you're a security engineer and if you're off, or like you're taking time off, or you're at a conference presenting, whatever be the case, your developers still need to have access to all these resources so they can exhibit secure behavior. They should not have to wait for you to be able to do that. And the final thing is repeatability, right? Like this process is very repeatable. You can transfer it for like securing pretty much all different parts of your network and resources. So yeah. So I have an example. So these are our data storage guidelines. So we basically list out all, or at an abstract level, these are some of the controls we want developers and our database managers to build in. And, this again transfers across different kinds of database, whether it's SQL, whether it's Mongo, whatever kind of database that they're looking to build. So as you can see, it includes stuff like encryption at rest, encryption in transit, some newer databases claim to have what is called encryption during use or encryption during runtime. Then things like role-based access control, IP whitelisting, which is basically whitelisting only a bunch of IPs that should be able to talk to this database. Having logging and auditing turned on, so if there's something that goes wrong, you guys can go ahead and check the logs and see what's going on. Storing the database credentials in a vault, rotating those credentials every X days, and then providing authentication to that database through certain mechanisms. So we are behind Azure, so we recommend Azure Active Directory. So similar guidelines that you guys want to publish. The next part, which I believe is the biggest part of this job or in such a journey, is education, evangelism, and communication. So the biggest thing that you'll have to do in this journey is basically educating yourself and others about security. The need for security, the value for it, what kind of input you can provide, what kind of things that you guys can go about securing. And it's not just about doing something and then you think your job is done. Evangelizing what you did and what its impact is another really big factor. So at the start, there are definitely some employees who will not be the early adopters of technology or who will not be the early adopters of security processes that you guys roll out. So evangelizing impact of some of the work that you did earlier helps drive them to adopt security practices. For example, the first time you will enroll password managers or the first time you guys will enroll 2FA, there's obviously some sort of extra effort that your employees have to do to log into that resource, which they did not have to do earlier. So this is to make sure that they are also on board for any such future processes or outcomes that you guys want to roll out. And yeah, so communication is key. There's different techniques that we've used. There's no one technique that will work in all cases with all people. There's this classic shock and awe / fear technique, which is basically that you show them a live hacking demo or you actually take over or compromise one of their resources and show them that this is what a hacker can do or this is what security professionals, have resources to do. So if you guys don't take this seriously, this is what's going to happen. So that generally drives the motivation for them higher to, adopt some of the changes that you're talking about. In some cases, such a stick doesn't work, so you have to be more of a helping hand. Classic examples you include when PMs or engineering managers come up to you and say that we really need to push out this product in the next 2 weeks or the next 4 weeks, but we haven't had a chance to implement a lot of security, right? So can you help us out and review it and make sure we are covering at least the basics that we need to? So there you have to provide more of a flexible helping hand. And yeah, one other key information to understand is communication does not always mean telling everyone about it. So there has to be a silo between what information should be public and what information should be private, especially if you've discovered something that's potentially can lead to an incident or you found out that something did not go well. So limiting that knowledge on a need to know basis is very important. So yeah, so the next component is doing knowledge transfer. So you're the first security engineer. Presumably you'll have the most understanding and knowledge about security. So how can you transfer some of this knowledge to developers who are interested in writing secure code or even non-technical people? So the idea here is that firstly, we don't want to alienate or leave out non-technical people. They are as much a part of securing your organization as technical developers. So some of the things that we've used are developer security workshops, which basically educate them about OWASP top 10, how to write secure code. In our case, it was Python that they were writing. So how to write secure code in Python. And similarly for non-technical employees, it was the security 101 training, which is basically how do you keep yourself safe at work and at home. So yeah, and one other presentation that we made, which is basically called Security is Not Complete Without You, emphasizing the need for developers and technical people to take part in the security process. So yeah, one other thing I want to talk about is developer empathy, right? So you have to put yourself in their shoes. In most startups, it's very high intensity and there are strict deadlines to ship code, right, or ship features, and that's how a startup sustains. If there's no product, there's no company, there's nothing left to secure. So that's why there are a lot of times when there'll be more product focus and you'll be frustrated saying, why are they not taking security seriously? The other thing is it will definitely be new for them, especially if you're the first person there, because before you, they were probably not being asked to do this, or they were not people who were pressing down their necks to say, why aren't you building security in your code or in your processes? So that's where we have to empathize and realize that, this is new for them. We have to work with them and act as an enabler rather than a blocker, or just hang a sword around their neck saying, you have to do this, otherwise I won't let you ship code. So that's the idea behind development empathy. One of the key pieces we want to understand is motivation, right? As security professionals, I feel we get this bit wrong a lot of times. So a lot of times it's assumed that people are not doing security because they can't do it, right? Or they don't have the know-how to do it. But the first thing that we need to address is, do they even want to do it? Right. So basically, in some cases, it might be that they might have the technical skill, but they don't care about it. So motivation piece is the first piece that we need to hit, and then other steps can follow from there. One of the things that I've used successfully to help me out on this journey is the Security Champs program, or Security Satellites program, as it's called in some companies. So quick show of hands, how many guys have heard of these programs or have used it in their companies before? Quite a few of them, that's nice. Yeah, so I'll just run over my ideology on Security Champs and how I've seen it work. So basically the idea here is non-security dedicated employees help out with security stuff. When I say non-security dedicated, the idea is that I am a firm believer that security is everybody's job, right? So you can't really say that, okay, this person doesn't care about security or they don't have to care about security. As dedicated security employees, like security professionals like us who work in the security team. So it's other people from there. So whether it's your developers, whether it's your marketing folks, finance, legal, HR, any of the people in these division, when they are helping out with maintaining and upholding the security standards and security culture of your team. As I mentioned earlier, in some organizations, it's also called Security Ambassadors or Security Satellites program. And fundamentally, it's the security equivalent of the police asking you to be the eyes, or police asking the citizens of a state or a city to be its eyes and ears, right? So, I've seen boards around London and other places basically saying, if you see something, say something, or, if you find out something, call us and let us know. So it's the same principle there. And again, the key point I want to highlight is this is both for technical and non-technical employees. So don't forget your non-technical employees. How does it work? So you have basically roughly a squad of security champs, and you run multiple rotations through them. You want to have ideally a security champion per team. So like one for marketing, one for finance, one for legal. Have at least one per your geographical location. So in a lot of cases, your team will be split across multiple locations, Europe, Asia, Americas, so have at least one per location, and roughly one security champ per 20 full-time employees is what the structure that we've seen works well. And the idea here is that you don't want a security champ to be responsible for more than, this number, because it'll be too much work and effort for them to manage. And the other key component of this process working well is this executive sponsor position. So this is someone in your executive team or your leadership team who has organizational power, whose buy-in you guys get, who will be able to help you institute some of the changes that are required, or some of the, manager approval that you guys need for this program to be successful. And yeah, so what do the security champs do for you guys, right? So primarily, they're the first point of contacts for anything security related that comes up in their teams. Their next biggest responsibility is to drive security improvements within the teams and the products that they're working on. And they act as two-way satellites. So it's not just when you want to, get something done, but when they find out something within their team, or they find out that they're working on a feature which, they should get reviewed or have some sort of security approval for. So then they engage the security team for anything that's considered security critical. They obviously get a lot of more security knowledge than they had earlier. So they, get trained in whatever areas are relevant. So for example, for HR folks or people who are recruiters, it might be around, opening and viewing documents securely. For people who are database administrators, it might be around how to, manage their databases properly. So whatever is functionally and, relevant, applicable to those people. And what we expect is that we want them to spend 10 to 20% of their time contributing to security initiatives rather than their regular stuff. And this is where you need approval and buy-in from their managers, because you don't want to impose extra work on them, because that's not feasible, firstly, long term, and secondly, they might not be excited about doing more work for the org when they're already doing all their other work. So that's where you need to have a good working relationship with their managers, so they, approve all this time. And in some cases where you need a stickler, that's where the executive team sponsor position that we talked about earlier comes into the picture. And yeah, what do they get in return, right? So the first thing that you can offer to them is basically an enhanced security knowledge and awareness. Security is a booming field, we all know it, not just for security professionals, but even for people who work outside security. Having some sort of security knowledge will help them advance in their career. The biggest thing that we've seen them motivate people is recognition and appreciation from their managers, from leadership team, from their coworkers. So there's a number of ways that you guys can, manifest this. If you guys are on some sort of messaging platform, or like Slack or Teams, basically showing up a prompt there saying, thanks to X, Y, and Z for helping us out here. Or if you mention it to the manager and he or she calls it out in their next one-on-one, or if you want to have like, some sort of appreciation box, whatever, this is your time to be creative. But basically, this is one of the things that we've seen work really well. The other component is swag. So anything that you can build around security. Like we used to have 1337 t-shirts distributed to some of our security champs, or give them stickers saying, I help keep XYZ org secure. So these are other things that we've seen work. And free food during meetings. All office employees, even though we have free food in our organization during every lunch and breakfast and dinner, but still, having cupcakes or donuts during meetings, that helps motivation a lot. And so what will this Security Champs program do for you, right? So the biggest thing is that it will help you establish a security mindset amongst non-security dedicated employees. So when you first join in, the security mindset is lower. You are building the security culture. So this will help you there. And it will enhance people's understanding and contribution to security. And that's the kind of security culture that you want. And basically, it will help you scale security in the organization. When you're a small team, there's a lot of people. In startups, teams grow really fast. So you want to be able to have more eyes and ears out there, caring about security, looking for security things. So next component is automation and alerts. The idea is very, very simple. You're a team of one or a small team. You don't have enough time to operate a dedicated SOC center or monitor tools 24/7. So instead of looking at a screen and looking at tools, set up meaningful and actionable alerts. Again, here the key is meaningful and actionable. So set up alerts where you have some follow-up action to perform, and instead of looking at the screen or looking at 24/7 tools, have alerts inform and guide your responses. That will help you save a lot of time. So next component is build versus buy, right? So what things do you go about building versus what things you go or buy third-party tools or vendors from? So this is a place where you need to find the right balance. Again, there's no use reinventing the wheel, especially when you have dedicated time. So the correct way of approaching this is that you buy the products that work off the shelf for you, and you invest time in building custom tools or integrations where your organization or your tech stack has unique characteristics. So I have some examples that I'll share. So I've used Azure as an example. So for example, Key Vault is one such place where you can store all your secrets, including passwords, including your certificates, including any keys, whether they're SSH keys, integration keys, so on and so forth. So the idea here is that if you are having this functionality, so make use of it rather than, thinking about building your own or custom password storage facility or secret storage facility. Similarly, there's the Azure Security Center, which will give you basic stuff out of the box, such as what kind of ports to open, what kind of IP whitelisting to build, what kind of threat protection mechanisms to have. And similarly, some of the databases, they will have encryption in rest, encryption in transit, functionality for you to build RBAC. So leverage all these things so that you can focus time on building some of the other things which will not work for you out of the box or which will not work as a default mechanism. And yeah, there are a lot of such examples. So there's this technique which my mentor taught me, which is basically called the iPad signing technique. And the idea here was that whenever he used to, face some sort of pushback or block from executive team on doing some security task which he felt was critical, so he would go into that meeting with an iPad, basically saying, can you sign off on this risk? And the idea behind that is that I have told you enough number of times that needs to be done. I think this was going to, impact us potentially in the future. So can you sign off on this risk saying I have informed you, but, you don't think this is important or we can't prioritize this, like blah, 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 whatever it is. But basically, trying to, shift the onus of responsibility of that security risk. And the whole idea was that executives, especially in the leadership team, they don't want to be the person who's consuming that risk. So when you prompt this strategy, it at least makes them think twice and say that, okay, this must be serious because this guy has come up to me or this person has come up to me and said that, we need to get this done. Otherwise, you're ingesting this risk. And I've used this technique myself to get buy-in. It works really well. The concern here is that this is not a sword that you can hang around their heads multiple times, right? You have to be very careful about using this. If you use this, for every small little thing, then its impact will go away. But if you use this at critical points to basically say, I think this should be done. If you don't agree with me, tomorrow if it breaks, it's on your head, not mine. That works. The other point I want to talk about here is safeguarding yourself as InfoSec professionals. We've seen this happen, especially in a number of cases in America, where security professionals are let go of their jobs for standing up for what they believe is the correct thing in terms of security, whether it's not paying money to hackers, or hackers as in black hat hackers or basically criminals, or whether it be asking to disclose a breach of their customer data, things like that. So this is where I would recommend all of us to be careful and safeguard yourselves. Document whatever you are recommending, making sure you're highlighting it to the appropriate stakeholders, making sure it's not only known to one or a few people who can, misuse that information. And yeah, hopefully no such instance happens to any of us in this room. So we've talked a lot about the AppSec and ProdSec kind of initiatives. So what are some of the corporate security initiatives that you guys can take? So the number one factor of breaches, as we all know, is phishing. So what can you do to prevent that? 2FA was built for this, but we've seen with a lot of new attacks, 2FA is also compromisable. So we personally prefer to use these things called YubiKeys, which basically work on this protocol called FIDO, Fast Identity Online. So check them out. Basically reduces the chances of phishing or your employees getting compromised by a phishing attack significantly lower than even two-factor authentication. The other thing is passwords. So, a lot of times things get compromised because people are reusing the same passwords. So instilling this part in your employer saying, why do you need to have good password hygiene? What compromise or what constitutes a strong password? And then you need to also provide them tools to be able to do that. So we rely heavily on password managers. And in case of production secrets, I told you about the Key Vault. So that's the idea there. Malware execution. So, not running untrusted executables, not double clicking on every file that they download. And yeah, the last element is data access control. So, providing this functionality to say who needs to know what, and providing access on a need to know basis rather than a blanket white or a blanket black policy, which gives access to everything. So the last component I want to talk about is security training and awareness. So we did talk about how to, interact with developers, but how do you raise the method and motivation for your employees across the board? So one thing that we've seen is that the LMS based training where, they're looking at videos and answering multiple choice questions, or you give them a corpus of 20-page long text, which is your InfoSec policy, and they have to answer questions based on that. That's not really great. So some of the key factors that we've realized, which I want to share with you. So firstly, training needs to be customized to have maximum return on investment. So it needs to be customized for two levels. So firstly, the functionality that they work in. So you don't need to teach, people in your finance team how to spin up a secure shell, because they're never going to have to do that for their job functionality. And the second point is, which needs to be customized, is the basic level of security knowledge that they're coming in with. So if you give them, if you teach them things that are way above the current security understanding, they will lose you really well. Or similarly, if you are teaching basics to a person that who already understands a good decent bit about security, that will also lose their interest. So you need to cater it to their current understanding of security. As I mentioned earlier, it's important for you to motivate your employees to care about security, so that they want to do security and not really have to or be forced to do security. One other learning here we have is that active and experiential learning can help improve retention. So instead of having one-way streaming of whether they're ingesting a video or whether they're ingesting text piece, if you can have some active engagement sessions, that can work. Whatever medium you guys end up choosing, definitely measure the effectiveness of the training that you guys introduced. So, even if it's as simple as running a phishing test before and after the training, to see, what things changed, who became more security aware, who did not really get impacted by all this stuff. And yeah, so we are big proponents of CTFs. They're actually, I think, a CTF going outside. So yeah, so if you guys are interested, that's one thing that you guys can use. So things to consider before you say yes to this job. Firstly and most important, alignment with the upper management, which is your leadership team, executive team. Understanding the motivation of the organization. Why are they hiring the first security engineer? Is it because they recently got breached? Is it because they want some compliance certifications? Is it because they are looking to get acquired and their potential investors are asking for a security breach? So understanding this. Then looking at what goals and targets you guys want to hit, right? So do they want to become ISO certified in the next 6 months? Did they get this GDPR hammer on their head and they now want to become compliant as soon as possible? Do they want to build a robust security program for the next 12 months? So on and so forth. And yeah, this will play around with your timeline and, help you decide what things to target and approach. The other component to work on is budget, both in terms of acquiring tools, getting new headcount, being able to go to conferences, so on and so forth. And one problem that we see, especially in the Bay Area or California from where I'm, the demand for security fairly outweighs its supply. So we have to be more creative in hiring people. So whether it's, outsourcing our security to other parts of US or even to regions like Europe and Asia, or hiring people as consultants when we can't get full-time employees. So yeah, being creative around that. And yeah, the last thing is basically, as some of you who've already been in this position will understand, this is not an all rosy situation. to be in. There are definitely tough days, there are definitely frustrating moments, especially in startups. There'll be cases where you'll be working on securing a feature or a new product for 3-6 months, and you'll find out that that feature isn't even going live. Or there'll be cases where, you bang your head against the wall so much to say that, I want this thing done, but it's still not provided to you. But yeah, my recommendation is, as long as you remember that goal and follow by it, you'll be fine. Which is basically to say that you have to secure the organization to the best of your abilities and the resources provided to you. And as long as you can keep, making progress towards that goal, it'll all be good in the end. Any questions?
Hi, thanks for that. Your presentation is great, but I have a question. What happens before you have to say yes or no? It's how you convince small organizations that they need a security engineer or any security at all.
So I think you have a valid point that it's basically saying, what can I do to convince an organization that they should care about security? So from a security engineer's perspective, there's a number of things you can do. Even if you're external, you can point out issues in their system, you can point out issues in their application. So let's assume you want to work for a company that builds a mobile application. You look at the mobile application, you see what things are going wrong or how you can exploit it. You can actually even see if they have a bug bounty program or something, that's external, so you don't get sued or there are no liability issues. But yeah, those are things that you can basically point to them and say that, okay, this is where I would provide value. The good thing for security engineers in general is a lot of companies are realizing this either on their own or because of external factors. So if they get breached, the first thing that they look to get is security engineers. If they want some sort of compliance certification, whether it's ISO, SOC, whatever they were giving, whether it was getting GDPR compliant, right? A lot of companies hired security engineers for that. So that is where it's coming. I don't really think there will be many companies who will be able to sustain without having security engineers. Whether again it's full-time or part-time, that depends. But yeah, I would say those are some of the things you can explore.
Hi, it's a really interesting topic. It's one of those things that I think, so your talk is one of those things that this conference should probably have more of, is the kind of practical stuff for professionals. I just wondered, your answer might be doing all these things to this question, but when you go into a company, you've just been hired, how do you stop yourself being the most hated person in the company?
Right. Yeah, so that's something I deal with on a day-to-day basis. So what helps with me in my personal cases, I do a lot of jokes with my team members outside the work, so they understand that he is a good guy, but it's his job to, act as a bad guy. But yeah, other things that you can think about is one of this philosophy, which is to be an enabler rather than a blocker, right? So you don't want to keep saying, no, you can't ship this. I won't let you do this. I won't let you do that, which is instead you go about it and tell them that this is how we can build a robust SDL so you can ship more secure code, right? Or if you find errors in their code, in some cases, the technique I employ is I know that they don't have time to fix it or they don't have time to review it. So I just do it on their behalf. Right, so it doesn't impact them much, but the ultimate product that we shipped is much more secure, right? So which makes both of us look better. So it's basically explaining this notion that I am not trying to be a jerk, right? We have to secure this because now we care about security or this is our job. And this is how we can work as partners or collaborators to achieve this common goal. So I think that's the basic idea behind it.
Yeah. Just a quick one on the steps after this. So once you're in there as the security guy, how do you go about getting the justification for increasing the security team size before you end up blowing yourself away? Because to be honest, yeah.
Yeah. So actually I have a good answer for that because I've used that multiple times. So you show the value of your work and then you show them this list of 20 other things that need to be done. Right? So basically it's saying, I did these 3 things. This is how much it reduced your risk, or this is how much it impacted the organizations. Now we need to do these 20 other things to become more secure. And I, as a 1-person team or with 2 people, whatever your team size is, we can accomplish only 5 of them. right? The other good thing is to help, like whatever, whether it's your CTO that you report to or any engineering manager, you help them make those prioritization calls. So when you have them decide between two critical things, and it basically comes up to them to say like, okay, I'm dropping this critical thing which can come and bite me back later, then they'll start thinking about, oh, we should really get this person more help. So, we can accomplish both of those things.
You mentioned about measuring the effects of training. Do you have any recommendations specifically around training on application security? Because like for Fish, I can see that running a simulation can give you some good data.
Sure.
But it's like other practices that are way harder to observe and measure.
Right. So one of the metric that you might want to care about is the escape rate of the bugs, which basically means how many bugs are identified at what level in the SDL, whether it's during the architecture phase, whether it's during the internal review, whether it's when they've already gotten live into production and it's reported externally, and what is your time to fix those bugs, right? So these are some of the metrics that you can use. The whole idea behind metrics is to show to yourself and to the your leadership team that this thing is working. Right? Because like you might get thousands of vulnerabilities or you might get so many attacks. So how do you show a value that, what I'm doing is working, and also like what you can convince yourself to do more and less of. So that's the idea for like CorpSec stuff I mentioned, phishing campaigns or security awareness test work. For AppSec work, it can be, like identifying bugs. Another thing you guys can try is like a bug bash day. Right, where a bunch of developers sit for half a day, try to nail out security bugs and see, how many things you guys can find and identify. So, it's good. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.